What's going on, everyone? It is me, the Lone Vault Wanderer, and welcome back to Lore Decrypted. On today's episode, we're going to be asking the question, which was the worst vault in Fallout? In my last Fallout Definitive Story video, which you can find linked in the description below, we talked about Project Safe House, the creation of these vaults, and some of the experimentations that took place within the vaults that were in the first Fallout game. But as you know, there were much more worse vaults that subjected their inhabitants to horrifying evil tests. So in this Lore Decrypted video, we're going to be looking at the most heinous vaults in the Fallout universe. Literally the worst of the worst. But first, like always, some background. The vaults were subterranean residences built across the United States, totaling 122 in number. The US government commissioned the Vault-Tec Corporation in 2054 to design and build the vaults. The initiative was dubbed Project Safe House. The official purpose of the vaults that was communicated to the American public was to provide protection to civilians in the event of nuclear war. But the vaults were never large enough in number to provide protection to even a small minority of the American population. The US government had a far more sinister motive behind the Vault project, that being to conduct secret experiments on the pre-selected inhabitants, mostly without their knowledge. The government crafted a range of social experiments to analyze and determine how humans would react in response to various scenarios. The US government then positioned Vault-Tec researchers at separate facilities to monitor and research the vaults. Ultimately, they did this in order to determine the best way to resettle a new society on Earth, or indeed another planet, if it were ever necessary. So of the 122 vaults that we know of, which had the worst experiments? There are certainly several strong candidates, such was the callousness and cruelty of the US government and also Vault-Tec researchers. But today we're going to try and pick one in the end. On the YouTube community tab, I asked all of you the question, which you thought were the most evil vaults, and here are some of your answers. By far, Vault 11 in New Vegas was suggested by you to be the most horrific vault, with 15 people in total suggesting it. And honestly, it's no surprise why. Goncalo Costa said that Vault 11 because they forced the residents to choose someone to die every year. But really, they just wanted to see if they would say no. But the evil part is the elections part, because the parties chose whoever they didn't like and got rid of them by sending them to their death. And the people that were chosen weren't able to change or choose their fate. So let's explore this experiment in more detail. In this vault, the residents were informed that every single year, they were required to sacrifice one person, otherwise they would all be killed. But here's the kicker, this was all a fallacy. The US government never actually configured a way to kill all the inhabitants if they failed to comply. Instead, the automated solution response holodisc would play, which actually congratulated the vault citizens for deciding not to sacrifice one of their own. It then told them that no one was going to be exterminated for disobeying, and as a cherry on top, the mechanism to open the main vault door had been enabled, which would have allowed the residents to come and go as they pleased. And of course, this was never even hinted to the Vault 11 residents. They had no possible way of knowing that this would be the outcome. So what happened in the end? Naturally, each year, the residents voted someone to be killed and sacrificed. The person would enter a chamber and be executed by the vault's computers. This started with the first vault overseer, who was fully aware of the vault's experiment, so the remainder of the vault chose to sacrifice him in revenge. From then on, every person nominated to be the vault overseer would then be sacrificed when the time came. This all eventually led to an armed coup where most of the vault inhabitants killed each other, leaving only 5 survivors. These remaining 5 vault dwellers finally chose not to nominate a sacrificial lamb, which is when they were finally told about the truth of the experiment. But even at this stage, the deaths did not stop. The survivors were so ashamed about what happened in the vault that they discussed whether they should kill themselves as a form of punishment. But as they all argued about it, one of the vault survivors pulled out a gun and killed the rest of them, leaving that one person free to leave the vault. So look, it is no surprise that Vault 11 was the most suggested by all of you. Literally 15 people suggested this vault, and the next one down was only 5 people. So I do think that Vault 11 is probably one of, if not the most evil, cruel vault in the Fallout universe, especially because of the way it was constructed. Because if in literally the first year they decided to not sacrifice anyone, that vault door would have opened, they would have heard the holodisc message, and they would have been free to leave. They would have been free to create an awesome society. But that's not what happened, because Vault-Tec and the US government didn't even suggest or hint or imply that there was another possible solution. All they said was, if you don't comply, we're going to kill all of you. So what would a society, what would a group do in that circumstance? They didn't know any of the other people. They had some of their families, and they just met a bunch of strangers, right? And then when they discovered that the overseer knew about this cruel experiment, it kind of was a natural progression that he would be the first to go. But then at that stage, it became so ingrained in their mind and mentality that it became routine. They kept doing it and doing it and doing it and created hierarchies within the vault that would lead to people kind of voting other people that they didn't like to be killed. It was insane how this experiment was constructed. And of course the government had to have known that that would have been the most likely outcome. Unless they had given a hint that there was another alternative, then there is no other natural solution or natural conclusion to that vault. In the end, everything failed, and I honestly don't believe that there could have been any other way that that would have gone. So look, if you were to tell me that this is the most heinous, cruel, evil vault in Fallout, I'm not going to disagree with you per se. I think it's down to subjective opinion. But I think there is one more worse one, only because of who was being experimented on, but we'll get to that. Then Vault 95 in Fallout 4 was the second most suggested. J. Ruiz 007 stated that, "I feel Vault 95 was pretty bad in my opinion. It would gain the trust of broken and addicted people, call each other family, unify to a cleaner life, only to have it undone by a closet of drugs, and everyone relapsing and dying from their old habits, and coming so close to a new life they wanted." And some background about this vault. The US government and Vault Tech extensively pre-selected the inhabitants to all be chem addicts. The vault was then built to be a rehab clinic of sorts, and at least for the first 5 years they were all assisted with their addictions under the program. But then something horrific occurred. An agent of Vault Tech that had been planted from the get-go had intentionally discovered a planted supply of drugs and chems to see how the rest of the Vault citizens would react. Remembering that these people had just undergone 5 years of successful rehab treatment, with many being able to manage and persevere through their addictions. But as soon as this stash was discovered, everything naturally was thrown into chaos. Many of the residents completely relapsed, deciding to once again submit to their past addictions, which resulted in many of them overdosing and dying. Others instead began to fight one another, with people being killed in the process. While some at least managed to flee, most inside the vault ultimately died due to the sick social experiment. So this vault experiment was pretty messed up. It really was. I don't think it was as bad as Vault 11, but it was still pretty cruel in how for 5 years, right? 5 years, they rehabbed these addicts to be functioning members of society once again. And then that Vault Tech representative puts that stash out into the open just to see how they would react. Now, was this a test to see how well and successful rehab really is? Possibly, right? But even with rehab, you don't give someone the one thing that they're trying to get away from. That doesn't work. You need to wean them off of it and then keep that substance away. Otherwise, people will give into their basic instincts because at one stage they were addicted, and it requires so much willpower to avoid it, especially when that particular item is sitting right in front of you. And that's what they did. They placed this stash in the middle of the vault and said, "Have at it. Let's see what you think." And of course, some of them were going to try it out again. I mean, they were addicted to this stuff for so many years. And even though it was 5 years of rehab, what does that matter? It was so cruel. I'm actually trying to comprehend something like that, but I couldn't imagine what was going through the minds of those addicts, those past addicts, mind you, when they saw those chems. I'm assuming that some of them that fled were truly rehabbed and thought, things are going to go down right now. I want to get out of here. And then some of them were probably fighting over another to try and prevent, the stash from being distributed because they knew what the result was going to be. Then others just didn't care. They were like, nah, I want to do this. That's cruel. That's evil. It's heinous. It's all the words that I mentioned. And I definitely think this is up there, but I think there's still more worse ones, and we'll get to that. And finally, from the viewer suggestions, Vault 112 in Fallout 3 was mentioned several times. Robert Collins stated that Vault 112, no doubt. Dr. Braun was a sick, disturbing man, and though we don't get to see and experience every scenario he has exposed the Vault residents, I can only imagine all the pain and suffering. All of that for the entertainment of that creep. And to recap this, Vault 112 had 85 inhabitants that were suspended in stasis in cryogenic pods and hooked up to a virtual reality world, which was under the complete control of the overseer, Dr. Stanislaus Braun. Braun effectively tortured these people over and over. He first created a utopian world where the citizens could live a happy life in bliss. But once he got bored, he started to alter the simulations and began to virtually murder them in horrific ways. And of course, the host bodies would still be alive, allowing Braun to wipe their memory, resurrect them with another simulated world, and continually think of new evil ways to kill them all over again. So I think we all know how insane Dr. Stanislaus Braun was, and the entire just craziness of Vault 112, because we were in the midst of it in Fallout 3. We actually got to experience one of these simulations in the form of Tranquility Lane. So to be in that experience, in that scenario, to kind of see what the people were going through, insane. It's torture. Like, there's no other word to put on it. They were tortured and killed over and over, and God knows how many times, how many different scenarios or world that these people would have been subject to, all because Braun was bored. He was insane. How else do you explain or describe a man like that found pleasure in creating these just subverted dystopian worlds that were kind of paraded as a utopian world, all to just torture these people and kill them for his enjoyment? I'm struggling to think of words to describe this vault. It was insane. And I guess one of the worst things is that if you never went to this vault, they could have been kept alive forever and ever, because they were in cryogenic pods, right? So did they have the ability to actually die in person? I don't know. I mean, when it came to Vault 111 in Fallout 4, you were survived for hundreds of years, right? After the Great War, and then you came back and you went to search for your son. These people could have been alive for hundreds of years in stasis and continuously been subjected to these worlds and tortured, only to have their memories wiped and have it done all over again. Were there some remnants of these past torturings that were still in their mind? We don't know. We only assumed that their memories were actually wiped, but I could not imagine anything worse. I couldn't imagine effectively being born again and again and again and undergoing, these experiments of this sick, twisted man. Messed up, crazy. It deserves to be at the top of the list of the worst. But I still do think that there's one more out there. So thank you to all of you that commented onto the community post. I really appreciate all of your suggestions. These vaults were crazy. They were messed up. You notice as I was talking, I was struggling to think of words to say to describe them. But I still think there was one more worse vault out there. One more undeniably, unspeakably evil vault that I think most of you would agree is probably one of, if not the most evil vault, maybe on par or even worse than Vault 11. And the reason why I think this is because this vault was designed specifically to experiment on children. And of course that vault is Vault 75 from Fallout 4. Let's talk some background first. Now, only one of you actually suggested this vault, Sebastian, who said that definitely Vault 75. Parents were separated from their children and killed by Vault security. Then the kids were left to survive by themselves without any help or knowledge. It sounds effed up to me. And to go into further detail, this vault was specifically built by Vault Tech to be a safe place for children once a war occurred. It was even located under a middle school, but once the children entered the vault, they were taken away from their parents and family. These kids then waited in an adjacent room, while all of the adults were murdered by Vault security nearby. Cold blood, they were simply killed. The US government did this to ensure that they could experiment and test on the children without the involvement of their parents. Essentially, the US government wanted to create a group of people that were very strong, intelligent, and could produce a gene that was capable of creating even better humans. But the tests that these kids were subject to were so harsh and cruel that there's no other word to put to it. It was simply torture. These kids were told that they could one day leave the vault to the dangers of the above ground wasteland, dubbed Up Top Land, once they were strong enough. And once the children reached the age of 18, they were tested once again. For those that were smart and obedient enough, they were integrated into the Vault science team. For those that were strong enough, their good genes were harvested in scientific experiments. And afterwards, they were killed. And then everyone else that was not designated into either of these categories were also killed after their quote-unquote graduation. So let's really think about this vault for a second. It was custom built and designed to be for children. Again, it was built under a middle school. This was its entire purpose from the get-go. And they portrayed this kind of false sense of security to these families and to the parents of these children that this vault would be capable of protecting their young ones in the event of a nuclear war. Then immediately after they enter, their parents and the other adults are killed in cold blood. There's no chance of survival. It's not like Vault 11 where there is actually an alternative, even though they didn't know about it. At least there was still a path where most of the people in the vault could survive. But not with this vault. Their parents were killed. That's it. Done. To leave these children on their own, not seeing their parents or their loved ones ever again. So that in and of itself was messed up. But then, throughout their childhood and teenagehood, these kids were subject to cruel, evil experiments that borderline torture and are torture. It was torture, right? Just to determine who were the weak, who were the smart, and who were the strong ones. And God knows the full extent of those experiments that took place on those kids. But I'm struggling to speak right now because not only do they not have their parents around anymore, but then they were tested in such a cruel fashion to see who were the weakest. And then what happened to those that were determined to be weak? They were killed. They were kind of given a false ceremony, a false graduation, and they were killed. And God knows whether it was a humane kill or not, but they were killed. Were they killed by Vault security in the same way that their parents were killed? Maybe they were just shot. Imagine that. Growing up your whole life, and then when you turn the age of 18, you die. And then, the ones that were determined to actually be strong were also killed in the end too. Their genes were harvested so that the US government could create this kind of ultimate gene pool for God knows what other purpose that they were doing. Maybe they were trying to create super soldiers. Maybe they were trying to create different life. Who knows? Or just enable themselves to be bred with better genes so that society in the future could be very strong and very smart. But in the end, these kids also died as well. They were killed too. Even though by the definition of the Vault, they were deemed to be successful. They were deemed to actually be the ideal candidates, right? And then you had the other kids that probably suffered the lesser fate in becoming these Vault scientists that would also experiment on the other children. And I'm assuming as well, and this is just my guess, that once some of these kids reached of age, I'm assuming that they also bred, they were forced to breed and create more children so that the process could begin, because once all those children were killed, what would be the purpose of the Vault anymore? I'm assuming that there was a breeding program of some sort. That's my assumption, but those Vault scientists, like, the children that became scientists, they had to do something. And I'm assuming they wanted to keep iterating on the gene pool to become even better and even better over time. But that's just my speculation. Even though, disregarding that though, this Vault, as I mentioned, was designed to test kids, experiment on children, and then kill them in the end. What do you say to that? Again, Vault 11 had some sort of redemption to it. There was still, even though it was a heinous Vault, there was still a way where everyone could walk out alive. Not with this Vault, not with the kids that were subject to these cruel experiments. They were tested upon and prodded their entire childhood, only for most of them in the end to be killed. And then the others that survived would repeat those experiments on more kids over and over. That's messed up, guys. That's messed up. And that's why I think Vault 75 is without a doubt the worst Vault in the Fallout universe. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Lore Decrypted. So anyways, Wastelanders, that's all from me. Please let me know what you think in the comments below, and until next time, this has been the Lone Vault Wanderer. Please take care of yourself, and would you kindly keep fighting the good fight. Thank you for watching this video, and in particular, a huge thank you to Jaden, Mr. Cookie, Jessomatic, Bruce Hayhurst, Heretic Shark, Fuzzo Monster, Tazo Monster, Alex Morgan, Kalina, Brian Mota, Electric Piano, Cerebral Policy, Jackek, and the Desert Ranger, who are my $15 and above patrons on Patreon. So please take care of yourself and keep fighting the good fight.